All right, welcome everyone, and very glad that you could join us today. My name is Paula Newcomb, and I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator of the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I will be the host and question moderator for today's webinar, Steps to Stay Safe from Cyber Threats, presented by Brian Hubbard. He is the Senior Manager of Customer Services at ENA, Education Networks of America. After the webinar has been transcribed, it will be available on the Indiana State Library's Archive Webinars page. If you are watching an archive recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEUs is in the video's description in YouTube. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to the Indiana State Library's e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word. And also check our continuing education website for other professional development opportunities. So let's get started. I am now happy to turn the presentation over to Brian.
Thank you, Paula. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for spending a little bit of time with us today. My name is Brian Hubbard. As Paula said, I am the Senior Manager of Customer Services at ENA, which is a really long title, which basically means I'm one of the sales leaders at ENA, and I support our team that goes out and meets with schools and libraries, higher education institutions, and healthcare customers, basically community anchor institutions across the country. I happen to support some of the folks in Indiana, as well as in the Northeast and Idaho. So when you figure out that geography, explain to me how I got all of that, but that's the whole thing. So a little bit of background first about this presentation. So we put this presentation together back in late 2017, early 2018. And at the time, this was kind of a new thing. We were primarily talking about cybersecurity threats for schools. But we were starting to have some folks question, well, how can I help to make sure that my library environment is going to be safe from this? And at the time we put this together, we weren't hearing from a lot of libraries that they were actually the victim of an attack. But we thought, well, let's put some things together in terms of best practices, some things that we know from working with our school customers, and let's work towards sharing that. And over time, what's interesting is a lot of this presentation that I'm going to share with you today has not changed. A lot of the issues are the exact same issues that we see. There are a lot of the threats that we run into in our library environments are the exact same threats that we were seeing, 4 or 5 years ago. The difference is the velocity that these things are happening at. We are seeing more and more libraries, especially, coming under attack for a lot of different reasons. So part of what we're going to talk today about, part of what we are going to talk about today is some of the things that you as a library staff member or as a technologist or even just as a person can do to be able to help make sure that you are safe, both as a staff member, but also at home. But also it's important for you to be able to understand some of these things so that when you're working with the patrons who come to your library, you're able to talk with them about what's going on and why certain pieces of this are important. So I'm happy to be able to step through this again with you. Again, it's interesting because we put this together a while ago, but the number of times we're being asked to talk about it has increased because we're seeing so many more things that are happening in the library space around cybersecurity. It's an important aspect of what we do. Really briefly about ENA, we've been connecting our communities since 1996. We have a number of different services that we offer to our library customers across the country. We'd be more than happy to talk to you about those if you're interested, so just reach out. So in terms of the security issues that we see daily, one of the things that is super important, or the thing that we see the most of, is just the amount of things that are coming at us. We are constantly bombarded by things that are coming at us saying, hey, click me, click here. And sometimes it's obvious. It's like, it seems like, oh, this looks bad. This looks like a thing that I should try to stay away from. And other times it looks like it's just a super simple thing that you were like, this looks like something legit, let's go. Then you click on it and then you're in trouble and stuff. So we see a lot of situations where people are susceptible to the attack because they don't have their guard up all of the time. And unfortunately, we kind of have to have our guard up all of the time. So we see a lot of this, a lot of click here, start here, do this, click. And we click, but we're not thinking about what it is that we're about to click on. We're not double checking that URL. We're not looking for the signs of something that might be dangerous moving forward. One of the areas around cybersecurity that is something that is relatively simple for us to be able to fix or take care of, but is something that most people ignore, is our passwords and how we authenticate to the different tools that we use. There are a lot of different password rules that are very hard to follow, right? You go to create a new password and it says you need to have 8 to 20 characters. You need to have a capital letter and a lowercase and a number and a special character and no spaces, and you can't repeat the same one from before. It takes a lot of mental energy for us to actually create those things. And resetting our passwords, it takes a lot of time. And we very often, unfortunately, we look at that and we say, well, you know what? I came up with this really good password the other day. I'm just going to plug that in again and again and again. And we end up reusing these passwords. And of course, part of the problem with that is if that username and password gets out there into the world, then every one of the sites that you ever used that reused password at is now compromised. The good news is a lot of the tools that we use today are warning us of that. So if you are on the Google environment or you're in the Apple environment, you're now getting some notifications that say, hey, this is a reused password because you saved it in your password file that's part of your browser. You are getting a notification that says this is reused. But it still takes us a while to go in and reset those passwords. The other issue is that sometimes we're in environments where we share passwords. And unfortunately, libraries are a good example of this. I've been into libraries before where, either on a piece of paper or on a monitor or whatever, it says the username and password right there. So we have to be really careful about not sharing our passwords. So one of the things that we could do to make passwords easier is it'd be great if there was some way that we have something that is really that is complex, really hard to break a password, but easy to remember. And that actually exists. So this little graphic that's over here, it kind of shows this is in the top left corner, it's got this troubadour and 3, and it meets all of the normal requirements, right? It's got a capital, it's got a lowercase, it's got a number, it's got a special character, all those things. But it's actually relatively short, and it's actually very easy for a computer to guess at what this password is. Okay, so and then it's hard for us to remember. Did I replace that first 0 with did I replace the O with a 0? Is the 3 actually an E? I don't remember. So you can see it's like, is this trombone? Is it troubadour? I don't remember what I did. So it's hard to remember, but it's easy to be cracked, right? When in reality, if all we did was say, I need to create a password that is 4 very random words, and you can see in the example, correct, horse, battery, staple, that would actually take 550 years at 1,000 guesses per second before a computer could actually crack that password. So a lot of times when I'm presenting and talking about this, right now this is a virtual background if you couldn't tell, but a lot of times when I'm presenting about this, we'll actually say, okay, we're in a room together. Let's talk about the things that are in the room. So carpet, window, doorway, pencil. So 4 random words, but I'll bet you would remember what those 4 random words were because they seem random, but to us now they make sense. I connected the dots, right? So it's something that I can remember, and it's very, very hard to crack. So this is actually one of the new standards. The problem is we've got to get all of these banks and other systems, other sites that we go to adopt this standard. So until then, you kind of have to break this a little bit. You have to get the 4 random words, but then you need to still put in the capital letter, lowercase letter, the number, the special character. So it's going to take a little while for this to get adopted, but it's important that we look at it. We need to make sure that we're doing something to make sure that our passwords are safe, because frankly, one of the areas of cybersecurity that's easy, unfortunately, for the bad people, the bad actors to get to is compromised usernames and passwords. So the other piece around passwords is make sure you change the default passwords. Sometimes we buy a new thing, whether it's a router for our house, like a Wi-Fi router, or maybe it's a new camera, one of the IP-based cameras, or something for our house or something for our business. and we just take it out of the box and we plug it in, but it still has the default password in it, the default username and password. So it's very, very important that we always change those things so that somebody can't just look it up and go, oh, that looks like it's a Belkin whatchamajigger camera. Let me just try to log into it, and they're in. So we've got to make sure, again, passwords, something important that we can change and take control of. I also want to mention multi-factor authentication here. So if you're not familiar with it, multi-factor authentication is basically having a username and having a password, and then having something else, like say my cell phone, which doesn't show up very well, having something like my cell phone that has some sort of an authenticating tool built into it. So I know my username and my password, but unless somebody, a bad actor, had my phone and could log in to my phone and be able to launch the authenticator tool, they would never have that third piece that is required to be able to get logged in. Multi-factor authentication is becoming more and more important, and many of the tools that we are starting to use require it automatically. So for again, if you happen to be an Apple user, you have to use multi-factor authentication to be able to log into your Apple ID account, for example. We're seeing multi-factor authentication also being required by some cyber insurance companies. So if you want to be able to continue to have cyber insurance for your library, you may need to switch to multi-factor authentication for a number of your tools. That could be everything from logging into, say, a server as an administrator to be able to manage that server. It could also be to be able to log into some of the other tools that you're using in the library. So you may need to check with your cyber insurance provider to determine whether you are going to be required to have some sort of multi-factor authentication. One of the other pieces to this is we're seeing more and more things around biometrics that may allow us to have less reliance on actual usernames and passwords. So if I can have something like my phone that is able to recognize me and know who I am based off of my biometrics, then that's going to be more secure than a whole lot of passwords, usernames and password combinations that I may have reused over time, and then may be out there that somebody could use to try to be able to do something bad against me or against my library. So those things are in the future, but that future is coming pretty quickly. So keep watching for that, because it may allow us to be able to not have to worry about correct horse battery staple and worry more about I am my password, right? So passwords and authentications, one of the biggest areas that we have some control over that we need to make sure that we're being careful with. The next area to talk about around cybersecurity is phishing. And this is quite honestly one of the most common areas where we see libraries and users come under attack using what is called phishing. So phishing, if you're not familiar with it, phishing is basically an email that gets sent to someone, and it usually has the appearance that it is coming from a legitimate source. But something in the email, hopefully you'll recognize it. You may see something that seems out of place, but that phishing email is designed to have you look at it, believe that it is completely legitimate. You're going to click on something, a graphic, a link, a thing, and you're going to go in and it's going to come up with a web page that, again, you believe is authentic. You put in what you think is the username and password for that website, and then mysteriously it's not going to work. But the person who's behind all of that now has your username and your password, or whatever other credentials they were asking for, and they can now take those and try to use those to log into the real site that they were pretending to be. So for example, in my role, I get a lot of email from a lot of different vendors. I receive very often phishing emails. They look like they're coming from a vendor. Hey, you've got an invoice that is due. Click here to view the invoice. And if you click that, it's going to take you someplace. And again, that website may look legitimate. But unless I'm looking very carefully, either at the link or when I get to the website, if I'm expecting to go to, say, bestbuy.com, but the URL says something completely different, that's most likely a phishing attack. Okay, so you can see here a very large amount of the socially based security attacks are all based around phishing. And with the pandemic, there was a big spike in the number of different COVID-related phishing attacks. So there were a lot of emails that were going out to people, and it would say something to the effect of, most recent information, click here to be able to download your state's current guidelines, whatever it might be. But there was a huge spike in the number of phishing attempts, as well as people who actually reported that they had been a victim of a phishing attack. These can be extremely expensive to individuals and to institutions. The average loss to an individual, if they are tricked into a phishing situation, the average loss is $5,000 per incident. And unfortunately, there are some people that continue to get attacked, because if you click on that link, they're going to keep sending you those links. So they very often, these are very expensive kinds of things. The other thing too is there are some times where you'll have a phishing attack that is very specific to your organization. So for example, for me at ENA, that might look like an email that came from, like, say, our CEO. So I may get an email that says, Brian, could you please make sure that you fill out this form so that we can do the blah, 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 blah. And if I click into that and it asks me to log in with my credentials at ENA, then they're collecting that information and using it to be able to log into our systems. So very often these emails, especially against an organization, they will look like it comes from somebody in authority in your organization. And the other thing that's kind of related to this is that senior members of our teams are often the most susceptible. They simply don't have the same level of experience in seeing these. So there are ways that you can help make sure that this doesn't happen in your organization. And the biggest thing you can do is training. So leverage phishing simulations. There are organizations that are out there. So for example, there's a company called KnowBe4. They're based in Florida, and they have an entire subscription system that they will actually send simulated phishing emails to your team. And they're, like in our case, we use this at ENA, and I just, whenever I see one of those, I click a button and it reports it. And then if this was a simulated one, I get a message that says, congratulations, you identified a phishing attempt. Okay, so training is so important, and whether it is something that is formalized from a system like KnowBe4, or it's something that you put together to be able to help people look for the things that are very common in phishing email, this is how you can help your staff, your patrons, so that they don't have to be a victim of this. You want to look for emails that have a lot of poor grammar. Maybe they have bad typos. The links don't look correct, or they're formatted incorrectly, or maybe the whole email just kind of looks fishy. Sorry, it was there. So if you see something like that, question it. A lot of times we're dealing with a whole lot of email all the time. It's constantly coming at us, but slow down and take a minute and look for things that just seem a little wrong. Okay, and make sure that the links that are part of the email, as well as who the email is coming from. When you look, a lot of times, the very easy way to tell it is a phishing attempt is that it says the email is coming from someplace completely different. Here in Indiana, several years ago, there was an example, and I've put the actual email address in here. Don't send this email to anybody. But somebody sent out to one of the library listservs, hey, has anybody else received an email from American Express saying that you've got an account? And this library person was like, we don't have an Amex card. I don't even know why I'm getting this. But this was the email that it was sent from. And as you can see, it's a name at someplace in Brazil. So even though it said it came from American Express, when you looked at it, the actual email address was someplace in Brazil. So look for things like that. Sometimes they're right there. They're out in the open. We're just not taking the time to look for them. Also, inside your organization, be sure that you set some rules around what should we be emailing each other about. So for example, we should never really be emailing a coworker saying, hey, could you send me the W-2 information for another coworker? Or, hey, I'm never going to send you a request that asks you to go buy 10 $500 PlayStation gift cards, okay? So set up some rules inside your library with your staff about these are things we're never gonna do in email. This is always gonna be an in-person question or in-person conversation. And that should help eliminate some of the things that might be coming at you. And then the last piece is if you receive an email from a coworker and you're kind of suspicious about it, go ask them or call them or say, hey, I just got this email and it says it came from you, but I don't understand why you would be asking me to send, over some financial information. I don't even have that. So sometimes it's just, let's have that conversation and let's make sure that we're on the same page about what's really happening, okay? Internet of Things. So if you're not familiar, Internet of Things is kind of a catch-all phrase that basically says all these really cool things that we have that we're buying and we're plugging into the internet in our homes and in our libraries, in our schools. Some of those things are really awesome. They make our lives super easy, right? But a lot of them require an internet connection. And as I was mentioning earlier, sometimes we're so excited about getting that cool thing that we take it out of the box, we just plug it in and it's like, oh, okay, hey, it's up and running and everything. But it's really important to understand that some of those devices have some security implications. You've probably seen in the newspaper or on the news or whatever, you've probably seen examples of people who, they've got a brand new baby, they buy a baby monitor, and then they don't understand why they can hear their neighbor, next door through the baby monitor. Okay, and there's a lot of technical reasons behind why that might be happening, but one of the core things that often is part of this is we took it out of the box, we just plugged it in and life was great, but we didn't take the time to go in and change the administrator username and password. So it's really important that we take that time, change the default passwords always, right? And then the other thing that's kind of related to this is one more example of a thing that we have that is part of our world that has a password. Right? So having some sort of a password management tool is actually really, really important and a really good thing for you to do. So in some cases, very often I get questions from folks who say, well, okay, I'm an Apple user, so I've got my phone and my phone is saving my passwords. Is that okay? And the answer is, yeah, that's a great example of how to use a password manager because it's all here. In my case, I'm on the Apple platform, so it's on my phone. It's also connected to my Apple TVs. It's connected to my MacBook, my iPad, my iMac at home. All of those different tools, I can have access to my passwords wherever I am, and they're all secured because they require, again, that multi-factor authentication. It requires that I have to be able to log in to be able to see those things. There are other password management tools, and I'm not a Google user, like an Android user, so I don't know what they have on their platform, but there are some things that can be used. In addition, some third-party tools like 1Password are great ways for you to be able to manage these things. The other thing is, quite frankly, before I started putting all of my passwords, everything here, I had a spreadsheet. I had the spreadsheet locked, so I had to have the password to be able to open the spreadsheet, but then my passwords were there. And so it was great for the ease of use of being able to, okay, whenever I need a password, it's right here. The problem was it was only on my computer, my home computer. So if I was out someplace and, oh, I need to log in on my phone for this thing, I didn't have access to it in that one spreadsheet example. But a tool like 1Password or having it connected to your phone or some other way to be able to access that all the time is a great way to do it. It will also alert you to the fact if you are reusing passwords, and it'll show you you're using this username and password combination on these sites. And it will give you easy links to then be able to click and go and change those passwords so that you're not reusing a password. Because again, that is super important not to have that happen. So Internet of Things and having password managers, change the default password anytime you get a new device. Make sure that it is secure once you've got it into your own environment. Okay, next, let's talk a little bit about ransomware and malware. So again, at the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned that when we put this presentation together, we were not seeing a lot of examples of libraries that had become a victim of any of the cybersecurity items that we were talking about at the time. But very quickly after that, around the 2018, 2019 time, we started seeing and hearing about situations where libraries had become the victims of ransomware or of a malware attack. And globally, ransomware damage has just gone through the roof. So when we look at the difference between, it's a 200 times increase in terms of the damage cost just in a very short period of time, and a really big increase in the number of ransomware attacks that have been reported. So here in Indiana, one of the things that has happened recently is prior to about a year or so ago, you could have an attack and you would just kind of take care of it. Okay, but in Indiana, we're now required by law, schools, libraries, other community anchor institutions, we're required to report those items to the state so that there is some better accountability, and with it, they are also at a statewide level. We're able to look at some of this to be able to see if there are trends, if there are things that we can help with in terms of training. How can we make sure that this doesn't continue to happen, right? But we've seen such a huge increase in the number of ransomware situations. Very often, ransomware is something that gets put into our network very often because of malware. Okay, so here's an example of a scenario. I'm a user, I'm a staff member at a library, I'm just doing my thing, and hey, I've got a few extra minutes, let me go look at this website, and I click on a link that takes me to what I think is a legitimate website, and when I'm on that site, I don't realize it, but I clicked something else, and in the background, some software got downloaded to my computer, and that software activated itself. And it then starts to spread to other computers on the network. And in some cases, it can sit dormant for 6 months. So if it's not detected, if you don't have malware detecting software on your computers, that can sit for 6 months without triggering, without activating. And if it's there and then you've backed everything up, but you've backed up an infected version of that, your backups are no good. And so one of the problems that we see is this sits dormant, then it activates, and then people are like, okay, well, let's go to our backup. They go and they try to restore or recover from their backup, and they find that the backup has been compromised. So this has become a much, much bigger deal, and it's harder to fix after the fact. So it has become more and more important to have endpoint protection. So software that's running on all of our devices to make sure that we are not allowing any malware to come into the network. It's also made people realize we have to be really, really careful about our backups and making sure that we're only backing up the very specific things that we need, and making sure that some of those backups are off-site. They are in the cloud. They are away from the library so that we don't have any sort of possible way that our backup could be compromised as well. So, we talk about, okay, great, I've got a backup solution, I should be safe. But if you're not screening everything out and keeping it from compromising your backup, then your backup is no good. So it's super important that we're looking at these things. Part of being prepared for all of this is we really need to make sure that we have a response plan. We need to know that if we run into an event, a ransomware event, how are we going to respond? Who are the people that are going to help us make sure that we can recover from this? So how do we actually put together a team of people to determine, A, what has happened, what is gone, what's missing, if it's malware, if it's ransomware, what is our next step to try to recover? And it's really important to look at it from both how quickly do we need to recover, and what things do we need to recover? So is it more important to recover our bookkeeping so we can pay payroll? Or is it more important to recover our library management system so that we can continue to serve patrons? Good luck figuring that out, because those are very, very important tools, but you need to know what's our first priority. And talking about that before you have an event is critical. You really have to make sure you understand, what are we going to do? How are we going to prioritize it? How will we make that decision? As I mentioned, like in Indiana, we now have a requirement that if there is an event, we have to engage the state. So Now it's more critical than ever that we have that plan. We know who we're talking to. We know how we're communicating that out to the community. And we're also doing everything we can to be able to bring ourselves back to a good state. Implementing tools like unified threat management, endpoint protection, all of these things that can constantly be looking for malware and for other bad things that are happening in your network is even more important than ever. And having a strategy around your backups, making sure that they are working correctly, actually recovering from your backup and knowing how to do it. It's amazing how many people run backup software all the time. They know how it backs up. They've got that backup, but they don't know how to actually recover from it. So practice that. Actually do it. Recover from a backup and make sure that everything is up and running, and understand what do you need to do to make that work. It's really important that you do that. And then you'll notice there are a couple things in here, like be suspicious of the "it's too good to be true" or "what a coincidence" situations. There's lots of examples of there is no such thing as a coincidence, and it should never be too good to be true. I hate to sound like a negative person in this, but with a lot of these things, if we took a little extra time and we really were critical of some of the things that are coming at us, we would probably filter out a real significant number of these bad actors and these different threat vectors that are coming at us constantly. One thing to remember too is sometimes when malware gets installed on a computer, it's going to pop up with a message on the computer that says, "You've been infected with a virus. Call Apple Computer at this number." Apple does not put that kind of messaging into their operating system. Neither does Microsoft, and neither does Google. So if you're a Windows user and you get a message that says you've been infected, contact Microsoft, that's not legit. I won't take the whole time to explain it, but my sister-in-law ran into this situation. She got a message that said, "You've been infected, call this number." She called the number. They started talking to her and they said, "Well, we need to figure out how you got infected. Can you go over to the router, the cable modem in your house, and can you get the serial number and another number off of it?" And she said, "Sure." Well, they were betting on the fact that she wouldn't be in front of her computer. So during that time, they actually took control of her computer, logged into her Amazon account. They ordered a bunch of stuff from Amazon using all the saved credit card information, and then they logged out of it. And so they didn't look like she had done anything had been done while she was over at the other side of the room writing down that information. When she came back, they told her, "Well, you need to take your computer over to the local Apple store and they'll be able to help you get this fixed." She called me to ask me how long it takes to get to the Apple store in Indianapolis. And I said, "Why are you going there?" And she explained what was going on. I said, "Ann, you're going to hang up with me and you're going to call your credit card company because you've just been hacked." And sure enough, that's what happened. So be wary of that kind of stuff. And I know that sometimes it's difficult because we don't all know how all of this works. But if you see something like that, just know that those operating system providers, Microsoft, Apple, and Google, they don't put up a thing that says, "Call our support number." That's part of the hack, right? One thing that is, I always include this, and it is something that is not actually like computer related, but it is phone scams. And I include this because it's kind of near and dear to my heart, not just because it's something that I see happen all of the time. Telephone scams continue to increase. So at your home, at your library, you may continue to see a real big uptick in the number of spam phone calls that you're getting. We joke about the calls around, "Hey, we're calling because your car warranty has expired." Some of those are just scams. And 65% of Americans have lost money to some form of a phone scam in the past year. And a good portion of people fall for it more than once. This is a real problem because we get to the point, like personally, I never answer my home phone. It's very rare that anybody is actually calling for me. And frankly, if they're calling and it's legit, I'm just going to let it go to voicemail. I'll listen to the message and then I'll call that person back and hopefully they answer, right? But it's important to understand a couple of things about why have these increased? And the first is a thing that's called neighbor spoofing. So prior to about, and I forget the date now, I think it was in 2018. Prior to 2018, a lot of times when we would get a spam phone call, it would be from some random place that you may have never even heard of, right? So someplace, like I would get a phone call and it would say it was coming from someplace in Ohio. And it's like, why, who's calling me from Ohio? Okay. But what happened is this thing called neighbor spoofing. And the idea is that when the scammers are dialing numbers, and it's all computers are dialing numbers, when they would dial a number, they will dial the number and then they will make the caller ID appear to come from a number that is in the exact same area code and exchange number. So for example, at my house, it's area code 765-455, okay? So I might get a scam call. I'll bet you my phone's gonna ring here and then you guys stop trying to call me. Anyway, I would get a scam call that would also be from 765-455. Now I'm a pretty big deal in Kokomo, right? So if somebody's going to call me in Kokomo, then I'm going to answer the phone. And that's what they're betting on. They're betting on that you're like, well, it's a call from somebody here in my town. So it must be somebody I know. I'm going to pick it up. And that really opened the floodgates for a lot of these phone scams to happen because we're a little more trusting of a number or a place that we recognize. So that neighbor spoofing thing has just gone through the roof, right? So in terms of like things to think about or things to, to help combat this, if you don't know the number, if it doesn't say somebody's name from caller ID that you really know, let it go to voicemail. Don't call back a missed number. So I have heard people, I've been in the room when this has happened. So phone rings, the person answers it, and they said, and the person who's calling says, "Why did you just call me?" And you're like, I didn't call you. Yes, you did. My caller ID says you called me. Okay. Yeah, your caller ID says that, but that's because the scammers, their computer was calling a whole bunch of people in your area from a group of numbers. And it randomly means that this person got a phone call from my number and they're calling back and yelling at me, why did I call them? Okay. This happens all the time. So don't call back a missed number. If they didn't leave you a voicemail message, there's a good chance it was a scam. And the other piece is hang up. If you do happen to answer the phone and you realize that it is a scam, the best thing that you could do is hang up. You will see things in the news or out on social media where people are like, yeah, I kept that scammer on the phone for 2 hours and I had them talking in circles and it was amazing. And I showed them what was what and everything. Okay. Well, the thing that you may or may not know is that some of the scammers are recording the entire call, legally, illegally. Like in some states, both parties have to know that they are being recorded, but they're already scamming you. So they're not going to follow the rules about this either. So in some cases, they're recording you and they're asking you questions like, I'm sorry, can you hear me? Sir, can you hear me? And you say yes. And then they ask you something else and you tell the answer, and they ask you something else and you say, well, I live here or whatever. How could you possibly be calling me about something in Iowa? I live in Indiana. Whatever you're saying, they're recording. And then they're taking all those pieces to chunk together sentences of words you said, but completely out of context that says, why, yes, my name is Brian Hubbard and I would love to buy a boat. Okay. So hang up. Don't think you're going to be a superhero by talking to them for 2 hours. Hang up. And then report these scams to the FTC. I know it seems like it happens all the time, but interestingly, it does. It happens all the time, but not a lot of these get reported. And this isn't just phone scams. This is all of it, right? In some states, again, like I said, in Indiana, we've got a requirement about cybersecurity attacks, but wherever you are, make sure you report it because this information, not only will it help others to be able to get patterns about what the scammers are doing, but it's important that you share that information so that you are contributing to be able to help things make the world a little bit of a better place and everything. So please make sure that you're passing that information on to the local authorities. There are hidden vulnerabilities, right? So many of us in the library community, we've had our networks in place for a long time. And in some cases, I know of a lot of the libraries that I work with, you've inherited a network that got built 10, 15 years ago. You probably don't know all of the things that are actually connected to the network and how is it physically connected. So it's important that if you don't know, you're working with people who can help you figure that out. There are hackers that are scanning our networks all the time. Right now happens to be in Indiana, happens to be statewide testing time, and I know that's happening in a lot of other states too. Our network here at ENA, we are constantly under attack because part of that is that the kids can literally go and they can do a search for, I don't want to take a test, and it shows them step by step how to try to launch an attack against their school network. Libraries, we don't see that distributed denial of service or DDoS attack. We don't see that with libraries very often, but trust us, we know that a lot of library networks, a lot of library connections are being hacked or being at least infiltrated and looked at on a regular basis. People who do bad things are constantly looking for an angle. They're looking for a way in. And if they can find a less secure network, even if it doesn't have a lot of good information or things that they can do, they are going to use a less secure network to test their methodology, to test and make sure that they can get to the stuff that they want to get to. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but one of the most important things that hackers can find is personally identifiable information, especially for younger people. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But if they can find any information that links names, addresses, social security numbers, all that personally identifiable information, that is gold to them. And so they're hacking your network. Do you know what's going on with your network? And if you don't, you really need to. You need to have a full understanding of what's connected to the network. How is it working inside your building? If you're offering Wi-Fi, are you making sure that you're separating the Wi-Fi network from the rest of your critical information and your critical tools? There's a lot of things to look at there. And so finding partners that can help you do that is super important. So I mentioned earlier, a lot of times, some of the things that get into networks can sit dormant. We've had, when I updated this presentation last fall, we were seeing information that said that sometimes it's dormant for like 190 days, 6 months or so. We've actually seen a couple of situations more recently where it's been dormant for 9 months and almost up to a year. So there are things that you could do today to prevent you from having a bad day a year from now or 6 months from now. So take the time to look at a lot of these things. The other thing too is your environment in a library. I mean, sometimes we don't think about our library environments changing that often, but it's constantly changing because we have patrons who are coming in, they're bringing in their devices. We're here to serve these communities. We want to make sure that they have the access that they need. But that can sometimes mean that you have a patron who's coming in with a device or a thing that is not as secure as we really need it to be, okay? So your environment, your network is changing constantly, and it's constantly got different things coming to it. Take the time, put the effort behind making sure that it is as secure as it possibly can. Data privacy is so important, and you'll see at the bottom left here, child's identity is worth more on the dark web. And part of this is because, you know, as a parent, we set up a social security number for our kids early on, but like I have a 24 and a 20-year-old. I have never run a credit check on either of them. Note to self, I need to go. I really should, because the first time that they go to try to get a home loan or something like that, if their information, their personally identifiable information has been compromised, it could have been compromised 10 years ago or 15 years ago. There are some reports of situations where, you know, kid goes off, they go to buy their first car and it comes back and says they own 3 houses. Nobody's checking. And that's why it's that personally identifiable information is so much more valuable, because we're not looking at it. So be aware of those things. It's so hard to protect something, especially when we can't see it. But we have to make sure that we're being vigilant and protecting, especially that personally identifiable information. There are new applications being introduced all the time that are asking us for more and more of our information. And you'll see some of the different operating system providers like Apple who are now starting to offer ways for us to opt out of sharing some of that information. We need to be very careful about allowing the websites we go to and the applications we use to have tracking of that information. So, you know, there are stories about people who, you know, they go to one site and they click a link and they click a link and they click a link, and they are creating a story about who they are. And that's all trackable. And that's important for advertisers because they want to be able to show you something that they believe is relevant to what you're doing. But it can also be really important to bad actors who are trying to figure out, okay, it looks like Brian goes to a lot of electronic stores websites. Let's send him a phishing email that looks like it came from Best Buy. Okay, they want to make it look like it's relevant to you. So just as much as we want to see things that make sense, like I don't go fishing. So do I need to see ads for fishing things? No, I don't. Okay, so great. From a personal experience standpoint, that's a good thing. But I also don't want bad actors to know that I don't see phishing. I want to see the electronic stuff, the tech stuff, the Disney stuff, whatever it is. That's the thing they're going to send to try to trap me and everything. So really important to pay a lot of attention to what we're doing around our data privacy piece. One of the areas we mentioned, kids, they're so important to all the things we do, obviously, but their information is more valuable than anybody else's, right? So there are certain threats that are facing our children and our teens that sometimes we don't necessarily think about because it's not always front of mind. It's not our thing that we're thinking about. And one of the things that's important is, children they're good targets. Because they're very active on their devices, regardless of the policies that say, oh, you can't use this until you're 13 or whatever. We know that there's kids that are using devices much, much younger than that. And they're using tools and applications and everything. So their knowledge level about cybersecurity is probably pretty low, but they also have a very high trust level of the people around them. So if mom gives them an iPad and says, here, knock yourself out, have a good time, they're going to trust that it's ready to go. It's ready for them to use. And they don't have as much experience seeing the different threats that we see much more often. So very important that we are taking care of protecting kids. We talked about sharing of information. Anonymous sharing sites is a big deal. There are a lot of anonymous sharing tools, applications that are out there. Not all of them are bad. So for example, After School has a lot of really good resources that can help children immensely. And it's anonymous so that kids can feel like they have that protection, that they can talk about some of the issues that they might be facing. But there are other tools out there that are not so good. One of the things that we talk about a lot about with younger patrons is the need to make sure that they protect their digital reputation. And that digital reputation is sometimes very evident. We can see it in the tools that they use, the applications that they use. And sometimes they're oversharing information, but they need to protect that. It's very difficult to recover or fix a damaged digital reputation. One of the tools that's on here is Yik Yak in the graphic. Yik Yak was a big thing several years ago, and then it kind of went away. We didn't hear anything about it. And then it got kind of brought back up. It resurrected itself about a year ago. And so if you are working with children, teens, become aware of what are the tools, what are the applications, what are the sites that are important and are good for them to use, and help direct them to those things. You have to really help kids understand what sites to look at, to purchase from, make sure they understand what the security looks like in their browser, the lock at the top. And the other thing that we talk a lot about is stealing. Kids are so used to the streaming era where everything is available. I just go to Hulu and I can watch all these movies. But sometimes they get lured over into areas that have content that have not, they're copyrighted content, and they're not really supposed to be streamed. But kids don't understand always the barriers or the differences between a legitimate streaming site and a not legitimate. So that's something to work on and helps students understand. And then the other piece that's so important is protecting our kids from the different issues that they might have around sexting, helping them understand that, again, part of their digital reputation is being able to take care of themselves and their bodies. And it's so important that they are aware of the dangers that are out there that are still tied to cybersecurity, but they are a danger to them. It's so important that if they're ever in a situation that they feel the ability to be able to report it and to be able to talk about it, there are some amazing resources, and we're going to have the slides available, but there are some amazing resources for teens around cybersecurity and how they can be able to help protect themselves. But we as adults have to be able to make sure that we have some of those resources to be able to point them in the right direction. So one of the last things I wanted to share is some additional vulnerabilities. These are things that are not necessarily, they probably aren't part of your library situation, but things to think about even just around your home. You know, I mentioned I've got a 24 and a 20-year-old, both daughters. So when they would have friends come over, of course, the very first question they would ask me is, "Hey, Dad, can we add Kinsey to the Wi-Fi?" Okay, so there's probably 20 plus kids that have been added to my Wi-Fi over time. I go in after a certain period of time and I remove them because they no longer need access to my Wi-Fi. I don't need somebody pulling up in front of my house in their car. They've connected once, so their phone automatically connects to the Wi-Fi. Once they're connected to my Wi-Fi, if they send an email through an anonymous email tool, it's possible to track that back to the IP address of my cable modem. So I really do not need the Secret Service coming and knocking on my door and asking why I'm sending bad messages to the President of the United States. So it's super important that we manage that. We manage that in our homes and make sure that we don't allow that. The other thing is, back to password sharing, there's way too many situations that we are aware of, and probably way more that we're not aware of people, and it happens with kids, it happens with adults, where we are sharing each other's passwords to very important tools, social media tools and things like that. And there's reasons for it, but make sure that you're A, hopefully not doing that, and B, if you're aware of it, remove those folks and change the password so that they can't do something bad to you. Teenagers especially, we think, hey, Amber is my friend, and then 2 days later we are enemies, and now she's got all the logins to all of my social media. What is she going to do to it? Again, we have to, as teens, kids, we have to protect, and adults, we need to be protecting our digital reputations. And I know I've said it several times, but make sure you're changing those default passwords, and think really hard about whether or not you really need to share any passwords with anybody, right? There's typically, if you really get down to it, there's usually not a lot of good reasons to share those passwords. Again, you can't click on these, but they're going to be there for you in the documentation that we have, but a number of really good resources, especially around cybersecurity, for both for students and for patrons who might be coming to your library. So with that, I'm going to take a breath, and Paula, I'll let you share with me if we have any questions that we need to step through.
Okay. Not a lot of questions yet, but we had lots of comments of people telling different stories about what's happened to them. One question we got a little farther back. Do I need a malware protection for a personal non-library laptop?
So I would say the answer is yes. And there are a number of very good free tools that are available that are looking at malware all the time. Personally, I use a tool called Malwarebytes, and it's BYTES. Malwarebytes is available across multiple different platforms. There's a free version of it that will look for malware on a regular basis, and it updates its profile. And the profile is basically what is malware. And so if there's a new malware that comes out today, by the end of the day or tomorrow morning, Malwarebytes will have a way to recognize that. So Malwarebytes, and I'm not endorsing, it's important to say I'm not endorsing anything, but that's what I use personally on my home computer is Malwarebytes. But I think it's important that everybody have something like that on their devices. It's free, it runs in the background. It's another level of protection that you can easily add to help make sure you're not a victim of something horrible.
Okay. Along with the anonymous sharing apps you talked about, someone asked about, how about WhatsApp? Is that another one?
So WhatsApp is a little tricky, and I'm not an expert on that. What I can tell you is that WhatsApp gets used by a lot of different folks for very legitimate reasons. Personal story, my daughter is a sophomore at Western Michigan University. She uses WhatsApp all the time, and it's easy for them to be able to create group messages without necessarily having to share each other's phone numbers and manage those individually. So she uses WhatsApp all the time. But I also know that it can be used by folks for bad reasons. So I think I don't have a great answer for you, because I think it's one of those where if it's used properly, it can be a great resource. It's being used by people in really good ways, but it can be used improperly. You have to be careful of that and watch for that.
This one is a big question that maybe other people might put in their answers, but we've got a person that said a couple of weeks ago, a patron came in with a letter from a sweepstakes saying that they needed to go to their website and put a number in to proceed to the final stages of the sweepstakes. She had no idea how to use a computer. And so as a librarian, is there anything that I could have said or done not to help a patron in that situation? Generally, we help people use a computer with any help they need.
Yeah, so this is a common question. Whether it's a sweepstakes or something else. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an answer, but again, I can't give you the definitive, here it is kind of thing. So to your point, we are, as libraries, we want to help people. We are there to help people do a thing. I think what's important, and again, my personal opinion would be, I think it's important that if you recognize that there is something that is maybe amiss, that you share that with that patron. And they may have no idea what ransomware is, malware. They may have no clue what that is. They may look at it and say, it looks like I'm about to win $1 million. I just need your help getting to this website, doing the thing. I think it's important that you share with them. I tell them, I've never heard of this. I'm not aware of this. I want you to just understand that there is the potential that this may be a scam. And take a few minutes and really look at it. If they press you on, well, but I want to just push this button and everything, that starts to get into what's your library's policy. If you're identifying, to take cybersecurity away and say, okay, a person walks in and they're holding a knife. What's your policy? How would you handle it if it wasn't cybersecurity? It was some other thing that has a threat to that patron. To me, that's where that starts to get into. Not an expert, not a whatever. I mean, to me, I think it's important to help them take another look at this and share with them your concern about this may not be what you think it is. If it's legit, hey, no big deal. But if it's a bad thing and you just help save their day, I think that's important. That's me.
Yeah, we've got about 3 more questions, and I know we're running out of time. So let me get to these as quickly as we can. What would you recommend as a good personal ransomware to use?
Like a tool to be able to watch for ransomware. So my number one thing would be, again, a lot of ransomware actually comes across as a malware. So malware is kind of a type of virus. Usually viruses are things that happen and they happen very quickly. Malware is similar in that it is bringing what's called a destructive payload. So it has something, a piece of code, an application, a thing. That malware is coming in and then it's living there for a while and then doing its thing. So the best, like in terms of like what's an application or a tool to watch for ransomware, it's really block it before it comes in. So a malware tool will typically be the best way to try to stop it as it's trying to be downloaded to your computer.
Okay. I know we've got a few more questions. How about, I'm going to go ahead and let me wind this down for just a second. So just as a reminder, I want to also thank Brian so much for all of your information. This has been great.
Absolutely.
And as a reminder, if you are watching an archive recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU is in the video's description in YouTube.